Good evening. We will go ahead and get started. I'm so pleased to have you here. This is the Our Universe Revealed lecture series. The series itself has been going on at the University of Notre Dame for the past 6 years. But this year we expanded. We're now meeting at the library. And we have people from both Notre Dame as well as Indiana University South Bend presenting. And it's been a wonderful series so far this fall. I've been learning so much. I love it. My name's Deb Marr. I'll be the moderator for this evening, and I'm at Indiana University South Bend in the Department of Biology. And tonight we are in for a real treat. So just to tell you a bit, we have 2 speakers tonight. Nancy Michael is the Director of Neuroscience and Behavior Program at University of Notre Dame. And she does research on near-based strategies, which includes neuroscience, epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience. And she uses this to understand both childhood trauma, and then she also works with organizations to think about how we can reduce those toxic effects on both children and also our communities. And she has partnered with Velshonna Luckey, and Velshonna is the Director of Engagement for Self-Healing Communities in Michiana. She has held a number of community roles. She's been the Director of Learning Programs at the Robinson Center. She's also been the Director of Outreach and Engagement at the United Way, and then currently is the Director of Engagement for Self-Healing Communities. And she's been an absolute leader. She's received statewide awards for her work. And really thinking about how can we support youth and families and developing these resilient communities. So this evening I'm going to turn it over to them to lead you through thinking about neuroscience, mental health, and communities.
And we only have an hour. Just kidding. All right, here we go. Okay, my name is Nancy Michael. I serve as the Director of Undergraduate Studies for the Neuroscience and Behavior major at the University of Notre Dame. And self-healing communities, it's really more, it's not an organization. It's think about it as a movement, as an opportunity for us all to learn a little bit more about if we want healthy people, if we want healthy communities. It's an opportunity to understand more about what our bodies actually expect of the world around us, so that we can all just do a better job of meeting the expectations of our bodies, right? Meeting the expectations of our physiology. And so one thing that seems to be surprising in a lot of ways. So when I have my professional hat on, I'm a neuroscientist by training. I spend a lot of time thinking about the brain, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the cells that make up our bodies and what our cells themselves need to be healthy. So, I recognize that most people don't do that, right? And that's totally, we all come with different backgrounds and different strengths. The brain is actually a situated organ. And so what does that mean? The brain is always, from before the time we're born, the brain is situated in a belly. And then as soon as we're born, the brain is situated in a different environment. And we're dependent upon care for survival for the first many years of life. And so our brain is always kind of situated in this external outside environment. And so it's these early exchanges. So what can babies do? They can cry. Can they get themselves food? Can they change their diaper? Can they be like, hey, mom, I need a blah, blah, blah? No, right? And so baby is totally dependent upon, right? Babies can cry, and the expectation, everything about this situated baby expects that when baby cries, that there's at least one person there that's like, I got you, baby. What do you need, right? Brain is situated. And so it's these early exchanges with our environment, the ways in which we're responded to, the ways in which we're cared for, that really is this major force from the environment that puts tremendous pressure on the way that our brains and bodies develop over time, right? All right, so kind of the foundations. And contrary to popular belief, we don't grow from being dependent to independent and we don't need anyone. Right? We grow from being dependent to interdependent. interdependent. How many people have ever been in a situation and you walk into a room and people are talking and having a good time and you walk in and you're like, okay, yeah, all right. And then you come and you sit down and you're like, yeah, that's all right. Yeah? You can contrast that with situations that we've also been in where you walk into a room and you're probably feeling good, walking down the hallway, coming into the room, and you walk into the room and you're like, ooh. And then you kind of look down and you get a little quiet and you like look for somebody that's maybe not going to make eye contact so that that's a safe place to sit by yourself, right? We are interdependent. No matter how old we get, our sense of safety is constantly being constructed by this moment-to-moment exchange that we do with other humans completely outside of words, right? It's instantaneous, rapid. No matter how old we get, right, this idea of interdependence remains central to our well-being throughout a lifespan, right? One of the number of reasons why the last couple of years has done a number on a lot of us because of, right, we were required to what? Isolate, right? And we could feel that, most of us could feel that at one point or another, right? It's this obligate interdependence that we never, ever, ever outgrow. Okay? And we can actually measure this, as somebody that thinks about brains like all the time, right? We can measure this. We can measure this in the ways that, right, the ways that we exchange in terms of behavioral, what's called behavioral synchrony. So the literature does weird things. We talk about attachment when we're little. We talk about this co-regulation of physiology. As we grow, the literature describes what we call behavioral synchrony, which just means that like we're attuned to each other and you do something and I'm paying attention, so I do something back to let you know that I'm paying attention, right? So we can measure this. Clearly between caregivers, right, that there's synchrony in terms of behavioral expression between romantic partners and even amongst friends and even strangers, right? Has anybody been to a sporting event, right? Amongst your in-group who might be not your friends on the street, but the people that you're cheering for the same team, tremendous amounts of synchrony exists in those groups, right? And we respond to that. It can be behaviorally, it can be via heart rate. So those with the closer relationships are actual, what's called our biometrics, our heart rate, our blood pressure, our respiration, and even our brain waves synchronize. So there was some discussion about like in classroom settings, you know, when you're in class and you're like, yeah, and everybody's feeling it, right? Brain waves actually synchronize. And these, right, not everybody in class is a romantic partner or a caregiver of somebody else, and they might not even be friends, right? So we are interdependent our entire lifetimes. And from a self-healing communities perspective, man, it's just really important that that's an obligation of every single nervous system that walks the planet, right? There's no sidestepping it. And so one of the ways, or one of the, this is me still, right? No, okay.
Yeah, but go, you start.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay, all right. One of the ways that is unique about this approach is that we can offer the neuroscience of it. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to my lovely friend and collaborator, Miss Velshonna Luckey.
Thank you. Hello, hello. So I am, how do I like to say it? I'd like to represent the fact that non-scientists can get all into neuroscience. I am a super neuroscience geek, and it actually started because my mom had a hereditary disorder called cerebellum ataxia. Her mother had it, siblings of hers, and then I have two sisters. And the one thing that everything that you just heard, the reason why we can do this movement and share it with the broader community is because we have a partnership with the Notre Dame Neuroscience and Behavior major. So when you think about everything that we're going to talk about, hopefully you'll have some questions. Understand the beauty is that there's science underneath this. Sometimes people hear about self-healing communities and they're like, oh, that's just that squishy stuff. There's there's science underneath it, and that's the beautiful part. And because we're in partnership with this fantastic neuroscientist and all of her students, we get to produce resources to also support this work. So this wonderful pink page you see here is actually taken from our booklet called Self-Healing Communities Manual, all right? In the booklet, every definition has a common language definition and a science-backed definition. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of time to just take a look at it really quickly. All right, so some key, I don't know which button has, is it the top one?
Top one is the laser.
That's not my friend. We gotta act like it's a laser pointed up there, okay? But if you look at where the underline, so buffering against stress. So protective factors, how many of you all have gone through something and someone just shows up? They don't know what you're dealing with, but you can genuinely feel them say, "How are you today?" And it just changes something in you. I have some really good friends in the room that we talk to. We're in a business meeting, and I get through the business meeting. After the business meeting, I get a phone call. And they're like, "It was just a little something different in your eyes. Is everything okay?" And that is when we talk about being a protective factor, not only as we as adults are protective factors, but we need protective factors. So a big part of our work in self-healing community is expanding that. So the more that we make these type of words and these experiences become a part of our everyday, the more that this community becomes a self-healing community. We began, I don't know you, but the way I looked at you when I first got up here, I saw the smile you gave back to me. And that is what we can do throughout our community. Those moments matter, okay? And then, so protective factors, we are also going to be having a podcast coming soon for people to be able to learn a lot more about it. But again, we have multiple resources. We have a children's book and a coloring book that goes along with it. So when we talk about protective factors, I'll read it since I'm on the microphone. It says, it's important to remember that to be able to care for others, we have to also care for ourselves. This is especially important because you are a powerful protective factor for your child. Okay, the reason why it says child in this book is because this is a part of a book called Brain Health for Primary Caregivers. But based on what we just heard Dr. Michael say, is being a protective just for the children in your life, or is it for also adults? Adults? Okay, yes, you got an A, all right? And so a lot of our work is about helping people understand what is a protective factor, as well as allowing people to show up for you. I don't know about the people in the room, but I was terrible at letting people show up for me. I was the one always showing up. I'm the caregiver, I'm the supporter, but my mom passed away and I had no idea how to ask for help. I'm a different girl now. One, I know the science is not about being weak or not wanting other people to interrupt. I now understand that there's this beautiful exchange when I'm able to identify the needs that I have, as well as allowing people to show up. So resources, this one right here is a part of a series that we're creating, a suite of resources called Brain Care is Self-Care. How often have we heard self-care and like, oh, that's stuff again? Raise your hand if that's been you a little bit. Oh, here we go again, right? But the one reason why we have brain care is self-care is because a lot of times we become desensitized to the very thing that can help us heal and that can help people in your community heal. So everything that you see us publish, I want you to know that it has been thoroughly vetted. It has been thoroughly researched. And if you see it, you know there's science underneath. So the first thing, and I have some that I can give out. So there's a postcard that you can have But also we have a book that's being released. So for every one of these, there are 2 pages of deep science. So how many of you all are like super neuroscience geek or just love science in general? You would love the booklet because there are words in there that I cannot pronounce. And so it's just rich. And so when we as a society get to a point where we are like, oh, that's just that feel good stuff. But now we know, wait, there's real science underneath this. It will help us like exercise differently and show up for one another differently. All right. So you're going to read these with Dr. Michael.
All right. And so part of this too, right? So there's a lot of, there can be a lot of noise sometimes, right? There's just a lot of noise. There's a lot of opinions. We all come to the table with different backgrounds and families and neighborhoods and traditions and all of these things, right? And so to be able to consider, right, it might not be easy for us as individuals. Shauna mentioned it earlier, right? To be able to consider that taking care of yourself is not selfish. Taking care of yourself is not weak. Asking for help is not because you're a failure, but it's this obligation of our nervous system to see ourselves. We're obligated to see ourselves as part of a broader whole, right? There's a, it's not Swahili, Ubuntu.
Ooh.
It's not Swahili.
No, it's not.
But anyway, so there's a word in a language we can, if there's a registration thing, we can text everybody what the language is. And I'm so sorry I don't remember it. But Ubuntu means I am because we are. And that is a simple truth of nervous system expectations. So part of this is recognize, okay, so like we want to do this, and sometimes it's scary, right? And sometimes we have to recognize that there's a whole lot of culture and history and all this stuff and family, right? That might be like, we're not going to do, right? So I love this for lots of reasons. Here's this guy. I can lift anything, for I am strong. What do you think about this guy? Can you lift me up? So my brother is like 6'4" and like a giant. So he like lifts the kids and throws them across, and not in like a mean smashing kind of way, but like in a fun, like toss them kind of way. Can you lift me up? Right? What's this guy gonna do? Except wait. You are brilliant and beautiful. Often the only person who can't see that is yourself. So many of us grown-ups had to disregard so much because we also lacked the protective factors that we needed. You're brilliant and you're beautiful, and oftentimes the only person that can't see that is yourself. There's not a weakness in it. There's a biological imperative to feel interconnected and seen in this broader social community. We grow from being dependent to interdependent as we age. And that is kind of the essence of the message of self-healing communities. The only way it works is if it gets to be understood and owned and acted upon by everybody. And I think this is our invitation to join this movement.
And so a vocabulary word, so whenever you see Dr. Michael, or especially any gatherings that have my name on it and it's self-healing communities, one, that logo that you see there, it doesn't represent an organization, it represents a movement, an awareness that if this logo is there, that means these people have an awareness of how to show up for others, that they understand the science underneath this. But more than anything, I want you to say, that girl always building our vocabulary. So you should leave every time you're with me, you should either dive a little bit deeper into one of these science words or walk away curious about it. So protective factor, right? We got one vocabulary word, and this one we call GCC. So general community capacity. And that's what self-healing communities is all about building. General community capacity. This research is based on work that was done in Washington. And so we know if we continue to generate this movement, this conversation, we make it a part of our everyday life, there is change that will come to our community. It's going to take a little while, right? And why vocabulary is so critical. How many of you all were around when Google first came out? They had to do all types of commercials and explanations. What about Oprah? The commercials, not okra, Oprah, right? But now it's just a regular everyday thing. That is our hope when we think about neurobiological care, that we can be aware. And one other thing I always like to remind all of us, there are many times that we come across somebody and you can tell they're struggling. And they might not be too nice. But when you're aware of the science that's underneath that, it helps to expand your ability to offer grace. And sometimes it also might expand your awareness that now ain't the time to have that conversation, right? And so, but we get to be kind to one another and also have an awareness. The other thing that I'd like to say is that self-healing communities, there is some of the harms that we have endured. It breaks my heart. We can't do anything about the wounds that are already there. But the research and the science, we can help heal those wounds. And the hope is help for that harm that you might have experienced or others have experienced not to happen again, or perpetuated in a family line or in a community line. So that's the importance of building general community capacity. Here is a wonderful, I love QR codes. How about you all? So you can, from your seat, you should be able to check the QR code. If you don't have a reader, that is our link tree where you can find access to the research that's behind this, dive in deeper. You'll also find our YouTube page and lots of other wonderful materials, and you get to also have our email address, which is selfhealingcommunities@gmail.com. So thank you all. We are now opening our Q&A.
Yeah. So we'll open up for questions. I'll start with one while you're thinking. So one thing that I was wondering, how have you, do you have any experience with how strengthening maybe your nervous system has had an impact either on those around you, communities, either one of you?
I'll go first. So I recently went through a peaceful divorce, and I am grateful to say peaceful. And the only reason that it was peaceful was because of this science. I know that sounds crazy, but it's the truth. One, I'm aware that in a lot of research, divorce is identified as, we say, oh, people divorce all the time, right? But in there it says children that have gone through, their parents going through divorce had an impact on them, right? Mm-hmm. So that means the decision to have a divorce is going to create stress between myself and my former partner and all those people who are going to be shocked that we decided to go through a peaceful divorce, right? And literally every step of the way, from I'm falling apart and I got to call my girlfriends, right? Or call people and ask them to help me and support me, or when he's upset and I'm upset, being really thoughtful of the tones, because it's already stressful. I know what's happening in my body, and I know the impact that is happening with other people. And it's just amazing because a lot of times the workshops that I do, people are like, how do I live this every day? And I always say, I never want to be just a teacher of this, but I want to be a practitioner of it. So if I gotta cry, guess what? I know that crying is helping me metabolize stress. So I let it out. Maybe not all the time, but I know it's important to make space. So how it has shown up for me, I believe it has been able to be a beautiful example of how we can still be kind and gracious in some of the most difficult of situations.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so many other things. Little bit of a bunny trail. So I was a non-traditional graduate student, and I returned to graduate school when I was close to 30. During middle school, high school, college, I experienced profound depression and anxiety. I tried to take my life when I was 13, and sometimes in college I was so anxious I couldn't leave my apartment. Fast forward, right, till I was like, 28, 29. Lots of personal things kind of brought me back to this question of graduate school, right? And the questions that brought me back to graduate school, someone very, very dear to me is a recovered heroin addict. And I remember when this individual was using, to be like, Nance, I don't want to do this anymore. And they weren't lying, right? But they couldn't not, right? And so that's just one example of any number of examples that I have personally experienced where the questions then that brought me back to graduate school were like, what's up with this, man? Like this, what I have the language for now, this decision-making circuitry, right? This whole we have a brain myth about this. You only use 10% of your brain. How many people have heard that? Okay, well that's nonsense. You use 100% of your brain all of the time. If you didn't, you'd have brain damage. Yeah? 100% of your brain all the time. This 10% myth comes from this part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is about 10% of neural real estate, right? 10% of neural real estate. So that really intentional, right? The stuff that we say we want to do. Decision making, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do. The ability to actually make those incremental steps to execute that longer term plan, right? That's all that 10%. That means 90% of brain function that is actually happening all up, right? 100% of your brain, 100% of the time. If it didn't, you have brain damage, right? A giant part of that is motivational circuitry and emotional circuitry and all of this associative memory stuff and motor stuff and sensory stuff and gut stuff and breathing stuff that has to be working all the time and is absolutely informing and putting pressure on that decision-making stuff. So some of the questions that brought me back to graduate school that kind of come back around were like, what's up with that? I know that my friend is not lying to me. I know they're not lying. And yet, they're probably going to die because they can't stop. What's up with that, right? Genetics within I'm the middle of 3. I was the one of the 3 of us that was able to hold a job by the time we were in our mid-20s. I was the one that finished school. Good parents, loved us fiercely. We always had food, you know what I mean? Always had food in the refrigerator, the heat was never turned, all those things. So for me personally as well, I went back to grad school and I was learning all of this stuff about brain development at the same time that I was pregnant, at the same time that I was raising my first daughter. And I was like, man, totally changed the parent that I would otherwise have been, right? Understanding that that little baby, the brain is a situated organ. So all of the things that I do, all of the things that my husband does, all the things and all the ways that people love my kiddos or not, it all matters. And to be able to gift that knowledge across, I've never met a single person in saying, you know what? I could cry. That kiddo that was so scared or hurt, that was exactly the expectation based on the way that kiddo was treated. And it's okay to mourn for that kiddo, and it's okay to love that kiddo, and that kiddo was worthy of being loved fiercely, and that kiddo now gets to be you who is worthy of being loved fiercely. And I think that is life-changing for so many people, and garners a kind of a curiosity then about okay, so how do I do this, right? Because if we remember those kiddos that we were, we don't want to, most of us, right? We don't want to do that anymore. So.
And I just want to say, because I've been around this a little while, I now can hear what she's saying and I understand the nervous system. A lot of us, we are carrying all this around, but we don't know there is a whole system in there. And so I want to say, I always say this in private, I'm saying it in public. I want to thank you for gifting that question and how you've landed on it, that now we are, not only did it help save me and I now sleep much better than I used to. I was one of those people who thought 4 to 5 hours was enough. And now I understood the system, so why sleep is important, I've learned. And thank you for choosing to allow that to now we get to share it with an entire community and across the nation, because our resources have gone all over. So that's exciting. So thank you.
I had a question. Because this would have been a question later on, okay? When you said, and our resources have gone across the country. So this is a movement. See, I'm totally ignorant on this, okay? This is a movement, a Meta Leadership Coalition to build resilient communities across the nation that evolved out of Notre Dame and the projects here.
So our focus is self-healing communities of Michiana. So right now we're focused on that. But self-healing community, the research, and if you go to our link tree, you'll see Robert Wood Johnson report, which then will tell you about Washington State and all of the things that they did. So the good thing is for us that we are already standing on proven research. So our focus is here in this region, but our resources, we have a children's book, I have a couple of things, I'll pull them out at the end and I'll show you. And people have ordered them and they're using it.
Yeah, and just to build on that a little bit. So these, if you can go back one, sorry, real quick. These kind of general community capacity models. So these are kind of evidence-based strategies, but with the understanding that every community is unique, right? To be able to solve some of these kind of wicked problem kinds of things, there's not going to be the thing that you pick up off the shelf and plop into any one place and expect it to be able to work. So what we're able to share through the partnerships, so we partner, Notre Dame Neuroscience and Behavior partners with community organizations across the region to help kind of fill these neuroscience knowledge gaps, to say that, like, okay, there are these expectations that bodies have and that people have. What are they, and how would we talk to them, talk about them to like a group of kindergartners or a group of mental health care practitioners or a group of peer recovery coaches, or, we help develop those languages. And so that's what we help to distribute across this much broader network. Does that help? Okay.
Do you guys work with any schools or children? Do you have resources for children like that?
Yes, so we have a lot of partnerships, and those partnerships are growing. And so our goal is that as we continue to grow, we will be able to do more in the schools. Our biggest partner that I am super proud of is our wonderful library system. So they have been phenomenal. So they wrote a grant to actually work with myself and the team. And for 10 months, every other week, they were in a training. A number of their program employees who are a part of their program department. So then this past summer, we had the Summer of Care. And they put all the things that they learned into specific programming, but it didn't stop there. It's now being implemented and talked about amongst the staff and how we can continue to grow. And so that's one of our biggest partners, which we know touches so many areas. But yes, we've worked with, in this coming semester in the spring, I'll be partnering with Transformation Ministries, working with their high schoolers, and they're going to do a book club, and there's so many different things that we have planned. So, but if you're interested, you can always email us if you want to join in it. And we hold a number of events here so that you can continue to show up. And again, our hope is that the more you see this logo, the more that you say, okay, I get to dive a little bit deeper. I get to learn a little bit more.
This is really very, very cool. So I'm wondering how, I was really happy to see the connection to public health, and it's great to see that Kimberly Green-Reeves is here. So for those of us who don't have expertise in medicine or neurobiology, but are interested in championing public health and equity outside of the schools, are there steps that we could take to, I mean, is the first step to sort of look on your website and learn more about this, or how could people get involved?
The first step is to email me. I have a phrase that I've coined called collaborative dreaming. And so basically, if you're interested, we want everybody to find a way, because again, there's no way that this can do the work if it's just housed here, right? And so you email me, we get in conversations, we see the possibilities, and then we just continue to grow it in advance. You want to add anything else?
Yeah, I mean, continue to grow, right? Because I think one of the beauties of the general community capacity model and the self-healing communities model is that it's a strengths-based framework, right? So that like I get that neuroscience might be an important part of this, but I understand completely that is not the solution, right? And so that everybody gets to have an opportunity to lend their strengths to the needs across the community. So it's not about trying to redouble efforts, but it's leaning in where we can and leveraging where we can, and that everybody gets to have a role to play within that framework, because we all have different spheres of influences, we all have different backgrounds, we all have different educations and jobs and all of those things. So we hope to be, we're in the process through just different wings of this work, kind of creating not learning communities / work groups action groups that have interest in different sectors. And so it'd be awesome to do some collaborative dreaming about what that could look like. That's for everybody in the room. Got that? All right.
Yes, because it has to touch every sphere of our community.
Thank you for this discussion of new to me understandings of health. And I wonder if the more you think about health, the more you understand health more deeply and with more layers and so forth. If you get a feeling that the wider society is really quite ill or poisoned, and you look around and see politicians of both parties trying to keep other people from speaking and voting, and you see cultural expressions like movies where superheroes and bad guys destroy American cities for entertainment, and you see entertaining games where people just practice shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting. And you could go on and list things that seem poisoned about the wider society. And you're working on an important understanding of a counterbalance of health. And so does it eventually mean that you need to have a theory of wider political action too?
So first, I want to say, I thought you were going to ask what people always ask after they say that, which is, does it ever feel like too much? And so the answer to that potential question is it always does, right? But we try to really lend and think about the realm in which we can continue to grow that. So that's the question I thought you were going to answer. Is it necessary to get to that point? Absolutely. And Nancy could add to this, but the one thing that I believe is we are a product of what we have become, right? And so if we continue to celebrate things that we know can perpetuate harm and continue to cause us to have poor health, without this awareness, because a lot of what you talked about is people just aren't really aware. We think that everybody is aware. That is not the case. If this is all I've known, if this is what entertainment has been, if this is the way that I understand what it means to be a politician, and you have to show up in this way, sometimes this awareness building, because that's the stage we're at right now, the awareness building, that's when people start having those aha moments. Like, man, I'm not a politician. But maybe this work, and as it builds, a great politician who can get into policies and all those different things can show up and make some change. So I hope I at least touched on it a little bit. You gave us a deep question, but I think, again, that awareness and the intentionality for us to start making some shifts in our local communities, it can help expand.
Yeah. And related, right, from an awareness perspective. So there's not a duality, but kind of, right? So that, like, the brain is a situated organ. The only way that we can understand the world is through the experiences that we've had. That's it. We haven't had an experience with a something. So the points of communication, points of connection, that allow for, like, creativity, reflection, critical thinking, all of those things. Those points of connections are called synapses. So the nice thing about it is that if you remember anything tomorrow that you didn't know today, it's because your brain has changed. You have physically new structures in your brain that allow you to think about things differently because you've had an experience that you can integrate into that network. All right. So from a perspective point of view, right? We can only think about the world and consider the world through the experiences that we've had. We're obligated to do that. And there's many different experiences as there are people on the planet. So if you grow up in an environment in which, right, like my brother is a huge gamer, and that is still how he, like, relaxes, right? He's learned a lot about himself over the years, that he exercises, he eats a lot better, he does all these other things. But for him, that's so strong in his previous experience that is still where he checks himself, though, because he's aware. He's aware that if he spends all of his life gaming, his life passes him by, right? So part of the awareness, right, is that every single human, their nervous system has particular expectations, right? No matter where you come from, no matter where you grew up, no matter where you were born, as a Homo sapien, our nervous systems have what are called species expectant experiences, which is a super sciencey term, right? But these expectations that our nervous system is looking for at different places of development. Sometimes when we're really little, we need touch and we need warmth, and in the absence of that, we die. It's an expectation of our nervous system. We get a little bit older, we need visual complexity. We need all this touch and movement and three-dimensional stuff if we're ever going to be able to navigate our world and be able to, like, take it in and not run into chairs, right? Not run into people. Right? This is a big problem, right? Okay, so to say that part of the awareness, right, we're obligated to view the world through our experiences, but it's built on this backdrop of these biological imperatives, right? And the distance between the expectation, the biological imperative, and the experience ends up being kind of the vulnerability in the system. So to be able to solve the problems, I think we have to recognize that there are many different experiences, as many different perspectives as there are people on the planet. And the cultures that we find ourselves in, the cultures that we come from, are part of this experience that we have that we're obligated to view the world from. As we learn more about what the expectations are and how these experiences can change and form, and I'm going to use a really charged word, bias our perspectives and our feelings about the stuff that happens around us, then we get a choice, right? So this 10%, 90%, right? So all this experience stuff generally tends to influence our behavior in this 90% of not executive function. What the awareness enables us to be able to do is to be like, oh, wait a second. Maybe I don't want to do that. So I like to think about it as free won't, right? If we're not aware, we're just going to kind of follow paths of least resistance. We're going to be enculturated into political systems, into whatever these systems are that, want us to be on social media all the time, want us to bite off each other's heads because we vote differently, even though we're neighbors and we can share a meal if we chose, right? Once we understand a little bit more about the way that these experiences have informed the way our brain works, we have this free won't moment. We have this opportunity to be like, is this the world that I want for my kiddos? No. Check myself. What can I do in this moment? How can I offer grace? How can I make a different choice? How can I, even though I might be really mad, how can I bite my tongue and wait to have this conversation until we're both a little bit more settled down, or whatever it is? Yeah. So eventually, hopefully, yes.
Could you go into a little detail, not too great a detail, on epigenetics and what it means and how it influences neuroscience and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So genetics is like the cookbook. It's the instructions for the body, and it's, we're just going to go with that. It's the instructions for the body. Epigenetics would be like if you pull out a recipe. So I'm going to have some people over on Saturday, and we're going to bake cookies, and it's going to be delicious because I'm going to have so much more cookie dough than I am going to have cookies. But these little spritz cookies that we make, right, they call for a lot of butter and a lot of sugar and a lot of flour and maybe an egg, right? So that would be the recipe, right? The recipe would be like 2 cups of flour, 2 cups of sugar, and an egg, right? Epigenetics would be like whiting out. So the words of the egg, the words of the recipe, the instructions might still be there, but I'm just going to cover them up. Right? So that when my body goes to read the instructions, it might omit that ingredient. Right? So it's not changing the instructions. It's just making some of the instructions easier to read, so maybe your body puts in a little bit more, or harder to read so that your body might put in a little bit less. Does that? No. All right. Okay. Let me think about a different analogy for a little bit. Yeah.
There are some cool videos on YouTube about epigenetics that are really for, so if you want to do a dive.
I looked up Ubuntu. I was looking at my phone here, and it's an ancient African philosophy from Zulu.
Zulu. Thank you. Yep. Thank you so much.
Other questions?
A comment, not necessarily a question, but me just coming down not aware of any of these programs, okay, and research. It's just initially for me, and I feel like I'm well read at the same time, almost overwhelming as to what's being embarked upon here at Notre Dame. You're dealing with communities like, oh my goodness, what you're just starting to do as far as scratching the surface, I'm in awe, So, good job.
Thank you. And the one thing that keeps us going is when you have that moment early on, even before we started the self-healing communities work, we were talking about adverse childhood experiences and the research behind it. And then Dr. Michael would go in and do the neuroscience side of it. And you'll have people in the room who have gone through such difficulty. And they have this moment where they're like, I'm not crazy. What? There is more to this? And for me, so you know how you do all these personality tests and all these things? So my personality and all these different things, and I grew up in Detroit, and my family, and they used to always say, you wear your feelings on your sleeve. I was like, where else are you supposed to wear it? And over time, I became really tough, right? Nobody's gonna get to me, not gonna bother me. And over time, I just realized I like that part of myself. I like that I love people. And I sent a message to my friends just, I think earlier today or yesterday, I was like, I'm never gonna stop saying thank you and how much I appreciate. Like, that's just in me. And now I have a job that supports all of that and allows me to do this across communities of helping people see how wonderful they are, and how we just have this nervous system that the more we care for ourselves, the more we get to have this broader impact. So when I get overwhelmed, I get a rejoicing in the inside that this work exists. And just maybe, that's why I got a little extra sprinkle of being sensitive and caring for people so that I could function in this role. So that's one of the things, like, it is. But boy, I bet you at some point when they were building that first computer, and remember, it used to be a size of a room for y'all who didn't know. Mm-hmm. That thing that we now put in our purse took up rooms. And so the hope is that I don't know if I could do it if I was a part of Washington, who they had nothing to base anything on, but just a hope in some of the science. But now we can look at other states and other counties who have done this work. And we have a resident neuroscientist that when I don't know how to pronounce words, I'm like, now what's that again? Can you know? So thank you for sharing that, but just really want to just show that that's what helps keeps me going, you know? We have a couple more minutes. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, 2, I see.
3.
Oh, no, it was her. So you go ahead, ma'am.
Oh, okay. So, oh my God, I have such bad anxiety and everybody turned up.
Okay, don't face me. Just listen to her words. Just listen to her words.
So you study ACEs, like is that a specialty of yours? Like I saw in the beginning, like the little bio, it said that. Like,
yeah. So my specialty would, I mean, I think you would maybe consider it, understand. Like I know all of that literature, but what I do is translate. Right. I'm a science educator and a science communicator, so that like people, so that the academy doesn't keep this under lock and key, so that people can be like, oh, to Velshonna's point, right, like. That happened to me, and I'm not crazy, right? Like this is the expected outcome. So I don't study ACEs directly, but I work with.
I'm curious about. I have a really high ACE score, so I'm very familiar with the ACE, and I actually have been looking into like chronic dissociation, like depersonalization and derealization, as like a subject of ACEs. And I was just wondering, like, as a neuroscientist, like, what is your knowledge on that? Like, where does that happen in the brain? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, very little, right? So again, I'm not a clinical psychologist, right? And nor a cognitive neuroscientist. So my background, I'm a behavioral neuroendocrinologist, which.
So cognitive neuroscience is like a different branch.
Yes, there are so many different flavors of neuroscience. Yeah, but my very surface level understanding is that dissociation that happens literally shuts down half of the brain, right? So that the emotional centers of the brain are just kind of taken offline. So that they don't interfere, right? But that it clearly interferes with a lot of other kind of normative brain processing, but it dampens the function of one hemisphere of the brain. Yeah. So there are imaging studies that will look at clinical dissociation. Yep.
And if you haven't, anybody who has done research and dived into ACEs, we also encourage that you take a look at some later research around positive childhood experiences, so PCEs. And then you can look up is PACEs, so that's positive and adverse childhood experiences. So you can add some of that to your research. And I hope you will reach out, since that's a point of interest, because again, all of us have strengths, and we really want to elevate everyone who's trying to work towards the healing of this.
And there were two other, one and two.
I saw Cindy.
I was just going to, mine's more of a comment, and I wanted to respond, add on to his. I normally get really overwhelmed with things with science, but I don't know whether it's just because Velshonna and I have talked about how we can apply this to just smaller communities, but I'm actually very hopeful because sometimes, I believe in therapy. I think it's really important, but to know that maybe we can do some of this in the communities and the groups that we already have to help each other, to help recognize it. To me, it's like, I'm not oversimplifying it all, because I know it's, very structured with science, but it's very encouraging. And I just am very hopeful. Maybe I'm thinking I'll start small, not try to change the world, but
that's ultimately how the world changes, right? Is through one relationship at a time and one interaction at a time, right? That like the thing that I find so hopeful about all of this is that it doesn't depend on a political system to fix it, right? It depends on us. And so we have a chance to reclaim our power and our responsibility in healing ourselves and in healing each other. And it absolutely starts in small community, because that's where our relationships exist, right?
I also believe that, like as adults, we've taken a long time to get this way, to think the way we do, to know that there are ways that we can actually reroute some of those ways of thinking, especially if you're younger.
Yeah.
You can start doing that now. It's exciting.
Yeah. Absolutely. And did you have a question?
I was just wondering, how can you introduce this information to people that may not be aware of it, or just it's like a year or 2 years ago, this would have been over my head, but I've been digging within myself for quite a while, and this makes sense, and I'm just trying to figure out, in the rooms that I'm in, how can I introduce this into that room?
So one is, make sure you email me. Going back to emailing me, because a lot of what we do in partnership with the library is these small lifts. So another thing I am excited about is that my first column was released today. So thank you. But those are those small lifts, those small ways that we start having these conversations. A lot of what we do here at the library, like if you think about what it means to gather in a safe space and have these conversations, sometimes we're just talking about one element of this. So the reason why we dove and we touched on all of these different things is because this was about that start, that interest. So I have a lot of suggestions on how to get started, and it can just be with a coloring book. It can be with, sometimes I do a workshop that I just have these beautiful greeting cards. I call it, it was here at the library, and I'll be doing it again next semester, but it's like play date for adults. That's not the title, but that's basically what it is, because it's like how to live, the title is How to Live Near Peace Science, which is neuroscience, epigenetics, ACEs, resilience, positive childhood experiences. And we think it's so complicated, but I have all of these beautiful greeting cards, and then I give you the science that can go underneath. Writing yourself a greeting card, mailing it to yourself, dropping it off on somebody who is unexpected, the gift. So there's lots of fun little ways that we can share this and let it spread. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and I would just add, like, I don't want to say, like, none of this is new stuff. Like, everybody knows this, right? Everybody knows that, like, do you think more clearly when you're calm or when you're angry? How many people say calm? How many people say angry? Like, we all know this. Like, but because of this cultural backdrop, for some reason, we've gotten so far removed from trusting ourselves and trusting each other that we need neuroscience to like kind of set, right? So like in terms of starting a conversation, we all know this. Be like, hey man, just calm down, right? You know what I mean? Like just take a step back, we'll calm down, right? And what's easier? Or, right? So culture also matters because sometimes we grow up in places that like it's not allowed, right? Why you gotta wear your heart on your sleeve? You got to suck it up. You got to toughen up, right? It happens to everybody. And so to be able to live through that, we have to start to believe it. And it's hard to make that pivot because what does that do to all this stuff that's built into our brains at that point in time? But we know, right? And so that's why relationship and community becomes so important because can you go up to a stranger and be like, hey, blah, 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 blah.
Or reach out for suggestions or support or advice. Okay.
All right, we can hang out.
We'll thank our speakers. And I love this. I think we have a chance to do some collaborative dreaming together, hopefully. And I want to thank you both so much for sharing the work that you're doing. So today, if you go to the South Bend Tribune, Velshonna Luckey has a column in there, and it will be a regular feature, and it just started today. So today's the beginning of information. So let me just show you one thing that we have coming up. So in the new year, on January 10th, we'll be back at the library. And Shahir Risk is going to be talking about connections between art and science. He's a biochemist and thinking about how the senses and the science of how we perceive the world. So that's coming up January 10th, 6:30 here. And I want to thank all of you so much for coming out tonight. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you. And we've got resources. So if you want to pick up some materials before you go, write down that email address. Anyway, thank you.